This is the Lean Builders Hoots on the Ground podcast with absolutely, positively no bullshito. Join us as we dig into exactly what lean construction is and how we can use these concepts and strategies in the field. This podcast will be different as we journey to job sites and mine the minds of lean builders, all in effort to pass forward building knowledge from those who have put their time in to learn a better way. Because that's just what lean builders do. What's up, y'all? Adam Hoots here, the lean builder, Hoots on the ground with no bullshito, and I'm coming to you with one of my favorite people in the entire world, Dr. Colin Milberg. Dr. Milberg, how are you today?
I am doing great, Adam. Thank you, and it's a pleasure to see you.
Man, I'm so excited to have you here. You are a huge inspiration to me. You have really taught me primarily a lot of the things that I know in lean construction and I believe in lean construction have come from your mind. And I feel like I'm almost a product of you in a way. I hope that does all service to you, but I want to hear more about you today because I mean, just look at you got
I know.
I want to hear all about who you are, where you come from. Tell me, who is Dr. Colin Milberg?
Absolutely. But I got to say, right, Adam, I've learned just as much from you as, you've just said that you've learned from me. And I think one of the things that has been so profound is, right, I can geek out on lean stuff all day, production theory, all the rest of that stuff, optimization, that's the engineer in me, right? But in the last 7 years, I've made this shift into realization that what really motivates me is the respect for people, the human interaction, and watching you demonstrate what that looks like and how to really connect with people has been an inspiration to me in my growth in the last few years that we've gotten to know each other. So I wanted to share that as well.
Thank you. That's huge. It's all about people.
It is all about people. So who am I?
Yes.
Yeah. So
who are you?
Well, this thing here, the stash is my kids challenged me to grow a handlebar. And I'm sorry I didn't come see you. I was in South Carolina on Sunday.
Man.
At a wedding for my godparents' daughter, and it was Halloween themed. So I figured I would carry it all out, shave off the rest of the beard, and go full Colonel Sanders or whatever you want to call it here for the wedding with a top hat and all. So
I want pictures.
I will send them.
I'm gonna put them. Is it okay if I put them on here?
Oh, absolutely! Right on the beach, beach with my mom and dad right next to me. So it was perfect, and wore it last night for Halloween. It's going to come off after this. My wife is now ready for me to be done with the mustache. But
she's yanking on the handlebars, huh? She's hitting the brakes.
That's exactly awesome. Right.
Well, you wear it very, very well, I must tell you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
But I'm usually much more of a conservative, clean-shaven kind of guy. But hey, this is great. I wanted to say that I've always been passionate about the building industry, and I credit my parents a lot for that. My dad did lots of tinkering around the house and eventually was a residential contractor in addition to being a psychology professor. He held both jobs simultaneously. I know that's an odd combination, but I totally had a passion for being in construction and building things right from an early age and helping him do the kinds of things that he was doing. But as I hinted at earlier, I didn't really figure out what drove me until about 7 years ago. And it had kind of been there all along as I moved my way through the construction industry. But really what inspires me is helping people make their lives better through mentoring and coaching. And that's really where my passion lies. I have to credit both my parents for that. Both of them are psychologists. So I think wanting to help other people has always, right. I'll give them both credit for that. How's that?
And I love that.
There you go.
And I mean, it is an odd combo. You talk about psychology and construction. I mean, that's an interesting combination of things. Like especially just everything that we talk about and stand for, right? How forward thinking of that your father to be in both. I'm super curious his thoughts on what's going on today, but I want to keep highlighting you because that's why we're here. Tell me more about you. How did you get into construction all the way to where you are now, where you found your passion, coaching teams and helping them inspire? Like where did all that come from?
Yeah, so I mean, initially it was working for my dad when he started that construction company right around the beginning of my working age. So right when I was 16, I started as a grunt working for him, packing the dumpster. That's what you have to do when you're early starting out. Make sure it's all down and tight. Or demolition. I swung a lot of hammers too, taking out studs and opening up
BFHs, yeah.
spaces. Yep. And then I had to apprentice every summer when I was at school. After that, with each of his partners, he had an electrical partner, plumbing partner. By the way, never asked me to sweat a pipe. I no good at it. It was, hey, I can thread gas pipe, but don't ask me to sweat copper.
We got plenty of plumbers around. We can handle that type of
There you
stuff.
go. That's
Yeah.
good. That's good. So I had to do work with each of his partners, and so construction has just been in my blood since I started working and growing up. And I thought I wanted to be an architect actually as I went off to school and was studying civil engineering in Boston, but I attended a summer program at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, and it was a summer opportunity to see what it would be like to be in school for architecture. And the culture of that business was just not for me. It was really highlighting the individual, at least that might have been that school's approach, and less about the team and working together. I kept on with the civil engineering, followed that direction, and as I was graduating was right at the height of the big dig in Boston. And so I got hired by a construction company to go right into the big dig. And that was an experience. That was definitely an experience all the way around. To be on a $140 million project is the first project that you're working on as a GC. And yeah, it was amazing and huge and all the rest of that good stuff. And I got to do a little bit of everything there. I came in as a BIM guy because of the architectural background. I was a CAD jack before BIM was even a term. And interestingly, we kind of pioneered at the time, I think, this idea. I was working with the superintendents because the model was so complex, and working in the tunnel, the superintendents would come in and we would manipulate things, imagine building them in the model before we built them out in the field, because we were working through downtown traffic in the middle of Boston. We were right in between Faneuil Hall and the aquarium. We had millions of tourists walking through our site on a constant basis. So we had to be dead on all the time. So building it in the model first was how I got started in that piece. And
I didn't know you were a bimbo back in the day.
yes, oh, totally.
I love it.
Yep. And I had a whole crew working for me, modeled the whole job and played around with it. My favorite story there was when we were doing the huge concrete pours, about 500 cubic yards, full of rebar, lots of embeds and everything else you can imagine, huge rebar. Initially, we would send out these drawings. We called them lift drawings. We would show the different lifts that we would build with the concrete, had all the rebar modeled, had the concrete in there, all the embeds, everything that needed to go in. We'd show it in each view, and we'd list the order in which it needed to be installed, because we figured that out in the model. Because if you didn't get the embed in at the right time, there's no way you'd be able to fit it through how tight these rebar were fit together. Yep, the cages were just really tight. So we helped them figure out when the conduit goes in, all the rest of that stuff. And then we put this three-dimensional view in there up in the corner so that they could see how the whole thing would look when it all came together. And they were like, oh, this fancy 3D stuff, who needs that stuff? Well, there was one day I'll never forget, about 2 months in, that I was running tight on time. I didn't have time to render the little 3D picture in the upper right-hand corner. And we sent the drawings out to the crew in the field to go put a rebar in and build it. And they were like, where's my 3D? I need that. I can't. It's like,
those isometrics are important, huh?
yeah,
Those are valuable, aren't they?
They are.
Yeah.
They are. So
Yeah.
lots of great experiences there.
I love that. So how did you end up finding lean construction, right? So I guess you've always had this kind of, you said construction in your blood, but I would also say there's some type of psychology in your blood. I mean, it has to be with two psychologists as
Prepared.
right?
Yeah. No, that's totally true. So yeah, there's a story I like to tell that that comes from the big dig on that one too. That's how I got into lean. So after being the bimbo, as you call it,
Sorry.
no, that's okay. I could take it. I wanted to be out in the field more, so I ended up as a quality control manager out in the field, checking everything, doing that, and eventually I got made the Ironworker superintendent when our subcontractor went out of business and we had to take over self-performing installation of these 80-foot long, 6-foot tall roof girders into the tunnel. Rather dangerous operation, really difficult and exciting, multiple cranes lowering the pieces into place, really difficult operation. And all of that experience in the field, in particular with the quality control and otherwise, the story really comes about working with our labor crew. We had a labor crew who would prepare all of the work areas for our trades. And one in particular I remember was the guys who would weld on the seats that the roof girders would sit on. And of course, we'd never be ready for any of our trade partners, right? We were supposed to have the work area ready. It's supposed to be ready for them. The day they're supposed to show up, it's not ready. They'd send somebody out to go look. You're not ready for us. And I would have to tell them, nope, you got to show up. You got to be here. You got to be ready. That's what I was told to do.
I've heard this story before.
Yes. And, and with that, the other thing I was told was if they say, well, we're going to have to back charge you for not being fully ready and getting a slow start or whatever, I was supposed to say, yep, no problem, knowing it would all get negotiated out because they would screw up something down the road. And we would just call it a wash. And I couldn't stomach it. It was not respectful. I guess that's the psychologist part of me. I can't stand seeing somebody suffer and not be treated with respect. That wasn't working for me. And I made a deal with Nicky. He was the 55-year-old foreman of the labor crew. And I started talking to him and said, Nicky, why are we never ready? Right? What's going on here? And it's like, well, if you watch, my guys get pulled over to do this, to do that, to do that. There's an emergency everywhere. And they're the ones who needed to take care of whatever emergency was happening with whatever other crew that was going on. And I said, all right, I'm putting a stop to this because this doesn't work for me. I tell you what, anytime you get sent off to do something where you're not just focused on the work that you need to do to get prepared for the next trade that needs to do their work, send them to me. I'll deal with them. I want you to focus on what we have planned and stick to the plan. And I didn't realize it, but that was reducing variation in the construction, right? I hadn't been introduced to lean yet. And we did that. And rapidly what we discovered was, hey, everything was ready for the next person who was coming down the line. And sure, there were some fires that happened and I kind of let them burn or told them, you created the fire, you clean it up and fix it. Nicky's job is it to fix it up for you. And after a few fires went by, hey, what do you know? The job was running smoother. Trades showed up. They were able to start on time. They were able to finish on time. Nicky stayed out ahead of everybody who he needed to. In fact, he was finding he had extra time on his hands. Things he thought took longer actually took shorter because he got to concentrate on what he was doing. To the point, my proud moment there is Nicky turned into somebody and saying, hey, if it's not on Colin's plan, I don't do it. Right?
Yeah.
If it's not on our plan, you go see Colin, I don't do it. And that was my learning about variation. And my second piece of that was being a quality control manager. And then I'm going to turn it back over to you, was watching the concrete not get finished properly and seeing that it wasn't meeting quality and watching what that did to the installation of the waterproofing that had to go down. And all this work that Nicky's crew, again, had to do to clean up and fix all the mistakes that were done in the finishing. And I was like, this can't be right. And we would lose tons of time on the job. So that quality perspective told me, hey, all this stuff is important to keeping the flow of work moving on a project. And that was sort of how I came to know about lean. And in the end, the last piece of this story is I was going to start on a new job somewhere, not local. And I decided that if I didn't get to run a job on my own next, I was the project manager. I left as the project manager of this job. If I wasn't going to get my own job moving forward, I was going to go back to school, and randomly ended up at Berkeley and sitting in Glenn Ballard's class.
Wow.
And in Glenn's class. Here he was talking about lean and lean principles and all of these things. And I recognized in that class, when I had those stories about Nikki and the others, what I was doing and why it worked, and why when I tried other things, it didn't work. And I was like, my goodness, there's theory, there's actual like things where I could apply this to any job and get it right all the time. I got to do this. So
and not just you, but anybody can take that theory and apply it to any job and get the same results too.
Exactly.
I love what you said. Sometimes I call it, you're a father, right?
Yes.
Sometimes you just got to let the baby cry a little bit, right? Like that's the hardest thing to do as a parent, is to let your child cry in the other room while they put themselves to sleep. It's the same thing when you get those fires. It's like, you got to let the fires kind of dwindle out or put themselves to sleep. Somebody else will solve the fire for you as long as you stay focused. I love I think you said protect the plan, right? And that wasn't just from a time and schedule standpoint, but then you brought up the quality side too. That was, like, hey, we're going to protect our time. We're going to go get it right the first time, right? It might, we've learned from what we did, and now how do we apply that? So I love it. So did Nikki ever come around? Did Nikki ever, like, Nikki was on your side, I imagine, right?
Oh yeah, he was on my side for the rest of the job. And the labor foreman who replaced him, who came up with him, same thing. We were best buds, and we really enjoyed working together. So
love it.
Yeah.
And you mentioned another name, Glenn Ballard, who, one of the creators of the last planner system, the Lean Construction Institute. Talk a little bit about him, and maybe Greg Howell, I think you knew as well.
Yeah, I knew Greg as well. Yeah. Glenn and Greg are absolutely passionate about lean and brilliant individuals. The story I love talking about Glenn is I sat through his class, and that I could understand and follow the whole thing, and it was great. I was really passionate about lean, but like all of us, as we engage in our lean journey, we get about this much the first time, and then we get a little bit more, and then we get a little bit more than it. And I would go to the conferences, being because I stayed for my PhD, and as I went to the conferences and would listen to Glenn and Greg talk, I would hear the first sentence, and I'd have to spend 10 minutes digesting everything that they said in like the first sentence. And so I knew I had reached a level of understanding when I could have a conversation with Glenn and Greg and actually follow along in real time. That was the bar of understanding. But two really brilliant individuals who just really challenged the industry in great ways and brought all this to them.
I love that. I mean, I've read a lot of history about them. I know enough to be dangerous and enough to be grateful. I'll put it that way. And again, feel like just a product of that same culture.
Yeah.
And so again, I appreciate that. That kind of off script a little bit, but I always enjoy when you drop a name like that. I want to hear more. And so go ahead. Sorry.
I still love talking to Glenn. He still blows my mind every single time. He really stretches the boundaries, right, of what he's exploring and connections he's making between other industries like art and entertainment to construction. And it's just fascinating every single time.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the fascinating things about you from my standpoint is, you know all these folks. One, you've got your doctorate degree, but you're also in real time apply lean to construction, and you work with teams. You have training, like you do things that further the lean industry, including redesigning some key courses and things like that for major players. And so I guess, can you talk about your ability to understand from an academic standpoint, but then also apply, because you make things so simple for people to understand. I'm just really like, how do you do that?
That's a great question. And I'm not sure I actually know the answer to that, other than I constantly remember that experience of working up through my journey and having all the stories, right? It's having all those stories of experiencing construction and knowing what it was and where people were coming from that helped me relate to whatever's going on with them. But I think the real secret is the piece that I think was the shift for me when I first started consulting and working with people, I was very much on that academic side of things. That's one of the things that Greg Howell actually chided me for was, right, hey, we all have to apply the theory. And that's not what gets people to change, right? And not that we should be in the business of changing people. They should be adapting and finding their own path. And it's that shift to coaching mentality, right? It's not respectful to say you need to change, right? They need to find that change for themselves. So the way that I make it relatable is to get to know that person as an individual. I used to think that the way to go about it was to go after their pain points, right? What bugs you? What drives you nuts? And how can I help you fix that? Let's work through that together. Let's reflect on it and work on it together. Now I go for what brings you joy in your job? And how can we get you more of that? I love that. I think it's way more motivating for people, right? The pain points are often what prevent them from having the opportunities to bring them that joy. So in the root, it comes out anyway. But I think it's just understanding the people and understanding where they're coming from and understanding their situation and explaining the concepts in baby steps that they can relate to. And if you don't see that spark of understanding the first time you're talking with somebody through something, you go after it again. And then there's one other thought that I have there, just my random chain of thought here. I was actually out on a job, a Whiting Turner job, no less, knowing that.
Know those guys.
There you go.
Yeah.
And I'm talking to their superintendent. We were out visiting the job. We hadn't been there in a while. And he's asking me about splitting. We had them set up boards and they're having really great form and weekly work plan and daily huddle conversations. Make ready, they're still doing, but it's a little bit of a challenge. And he says to me, I've got a whole new phase of work starting up, a finishes phase. And I'm thinking I'm going to split my boards, have 3 boards for the rough-in and then 3 boards for the finishes. And I said, oh, okay. Well, and he's asking me, how would I do that? And I'm like, well, why don't you show me where they're going to filter into the rest of the operation? Kind of just sort of map it out for me, and we'll see what makes the most sense for what your needs are. And he starts to map it out. He says, wait a minute, one just kind of flows into the other. I'm seeing as we go down the swim lanes, I don't need a second set of boards. These are just all going to flow right into each other. It's like, that's what you meant when you were talking about flow before, isn't it? I'm like, yeah, that is. And he's like, I get it. And I'm like, fantastic. I love it. And that was that moment where he just got flow. And it's about coaching, right? You don't feed people the answers. You let them see it and find it for themselves. And that's how they'll internalize it when all is said and done.
I absolutely love it. The Socratic method, I think many call it.
It is. Although people can get really annoyed if you can only ask questions. You got to know when the limit is where you can, if they're not grasping it, you gotta provide the helping hand there to provide a visual or an example that they can chew on.
Yeah, something tangible, something real life that they can know and understand. Like what you said about connecting people with their passions, at least that's what I took about your question to joy.
Yeah.
Ikigai, as the Japanese call it, right? Your purpose for being on earth. And so why are you here as an individual? Why do you want to contribute to society? Like what do you have to offer? I think it's so important to connect people with their deeper meaning. And many people in this world they don't even have a concept of what that means because nobody's ever invested that time in them to ask those questions that you're talking about and get to know them on an individual basis. So what are your go-to, I mean, you mentioned the question about joy. How else do you connect people from that perspective?
I also just ask nothing is always what it seems on the surface. So, whenever I hear people talk about things, so what's the real concern? What are you really concerned about? What are you really worried about? There's usually some sort of emotion in there, the fear, you and I have had these conversations.
Oh yeah.
Right. And
this is a slippery slope. Let's not go too far.
We won't go too far, but that I will poke it. What's the emotion that's, and that's the psychology, I guess, right? What's the emotion that's driving you to behave in the way that you're behaving or say the thing that you just said because you could hear the tone or the concern in whatever it is they're saying. And if you poke at that little piece, you'll get it what's really lying underneath. And that's where you can make that connection and help people really address, right? In many cases we're really scared, superintendents, this model of right, I'm the tough one, I could take anything, but there's a huge conflict avoidance and fear in so many superintendents, including myself when I was one, right? That the weight of the world is on our shoulders, and if we screw it up, it's all going to go wrong, and there's a lot of money and a lot of people's lives and a lot of other things that weigh upon us. And when you poke at that, that's when you get people to really talk about what concerns them, and then you can dive right in for that, right? Let's tackle that. Let's address it. Let's go right in. Not the emotion, but the thing that's driving it. If these are your fears, how can we make you feel comfortable that those, you don't have to be afraid about them anymore? I mean, that's what I love to hear when I talk to people after we've done work with them, is the 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, a year later, when they call up and say, I have my life back. I'm not stressed anymore about my job, because I in my gut, I know it's all going to be fine, and I have the tools to make it all work. And thank you for that. That was huge. Or I get to spend more time with my family, or I enjoy my job again. All of those things, right? And if you don't poke at what that concern is underneath, you're not really addressing that.
Yeah, my heart, I'm with you 100%. No doubt. I mean, you're talking about a lean builder. You're talking about every single thing that a lean builder does. Tell me more. I want to hear more about you, right?
Yeah.
Colin, why, because I consider you a lean builder for my own reasons. I'm curious why you would consider yourself a lean builder.
I'll define it, right? I look at a lean builder as anybody who wants to make their lives or their job, their life better, and not only wants to do it, but works at it, right? So that attitude of continuous improvement is what makes a lean builder, that ability to reflect and say, how can I make this go better? And if you've got that core, the rest of it is easy by comparison, right? What makes me a lean builder? I think it is that same passion, right? I was always a continuous improvement kind of person and mindset. What could I do better? But I think it was that piece where I realized that helping other people achieve that same perspective and come to find that they can actually not be, what's the phrase that I like to use that I describe for construction, hopeless resignation. Right? So many of us are in a state of hopeless resignation. And so that passion of not just continuously improving myself, but helping others improve themselves and rise out of that hopeless to know that they feel empowered to rise out of that hopeless resignation, is just huge. And I think that's what makes me a lean builder, if we want to call that, not the PhD. I mean, I could tell you, right, it, about production laws and lean theory on visual management and all that. I know it like the back of my hand, right? I can explain it at any level of depth from here to Sunday. But that's not,
not what lean builders do.
No. And yeah, we see flow, right? Or we see the opportunity for flow, but we know we can't create that flow without the people who are doing the work. And so if we create other quote unquote lean builders, those people with the passion to look at what they're doing and reflect on it and look at how to get better, that's what really matters in the end.
In fact, you probably wouldn't, you don't often talk about being a doctor. In fact, it took me, I don't know, a couple of years into our relationship before I found that out. And then even a couple more years before I realized how much work and effort it actually goes to get that credential. And so, for that reason, I have highlighted that specifically on here. And I always refer to you as Dr. Milberg, because I do know the commitment and time that it took. But you humbly often just go by Colin. Why do you do that?
Because it I feel like, one, it creates a stigma of being an academic right? Even early on in the big dig, me being a civil engineer coming out to the job, working with the crews on the detail that needed to be built, and they're, you're the college kid, you don't know what you're talking about, and I had to tell the carpenter, here, give me the hammer. This is what I want you to do. I worked for my dad for 5 years as a rough carpenter, right? I'm not asking you to do something impossible here. If I couldn't do it myself, I wouldn't ask you to do it. Bottom line. I think there's a little bit of that is people make assumptions about it, but also I don't want to create any barrier. The people that we work with, the people that we talk to, some of them don't even have their GED, right? And I don't want them to feel uncomfortable because of the title that it is. So I'm just Colin, and I'm one of you, and I'm just like anybody else, right? I'm here to help as much as I can. So that's where it goes. But since you went to the PhD thing, I will say it was a grueling process. I have to give credit to my advisor, Iris Tomaline, who also is at Berkeley, who is fantastic. And I was listening to another podcast you had, right? The rip and deploy concept.
Yes.
So again, that's all I did for my thesis. It was about tolerances and how essentially quality as it relates to tolerances and how we design things to manage tolerances cause so many problems in our construction industry. Not that they're anywhere compared to the other challenges that we face that we've talked about endlessly on the people front. But when you're doing your dissertation, you pick one small thing to focus on. So that's what I did. And I ripped everything from mechanical engineering and manufacturing about how to manage tolerances and said, here's what we should be doing in construction. And
Baby. Yeah.
that was my thesis. So fortunately, it's gained a little traction since then. Only took 10 years, but people are starting to use it.
I love it. I mean, anybody who knows about tolerance has been in the field when those inches just don't add up and you're looking at something, or that little half a degree off over 200 feet turns into like a foot and you're like, what happened? Oh my goodness. That's like, and then you get into field modifying. Will the architect be okay? Oh my goodness. So I've been there.
Yes.
Anybody, again, I think that speaks to your experience alone. And then I'm going to need some assistance here on a thesis. Don't tell anybody, but I might be calling you.
Absolutely. I will be there for you all the way along. Yep.
You mentioned something else about when I asked you what a lean builder was. You mentioned, that want to continuously improve, but then also the action behind it of continuously improving. And those are two different things. And often, we talk to teams about planning and executing. How does all of that relate? I mean, what are those two different things and how do they transfer into one another?
Yeah. So I mean, I could totally geek out on planning, right? And I get chided. I'll bring in Ryan Pop here, my other colleague who works with me doing our consulting. And right, what was the Eisenhower quote? Plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. Something to that effect.
Yep.
And right, it's so much fun to get in there and try and optimize the plan and do all the rest of that. Again, that's the engineer in me. But you got to realize somebody needs to put this into action, and the real world is not perfect and things shift and change. So as long as you put the good thought into it, I think it's going out and executing and trying to stick to. This is the difference, I guess, that I see is so many people say with all that change that happens between when we planned it and when we go to execute, that we should just toss the plan out the window. But a lot of good thought went into that plan. And the question I always ask is, okay, so what if it's a little bit behind, right? We came up with a good plan to begin with. Let's stick with it, right? Let's execute the plan that we have. Unless literally there's something we can't do, in which case we'll find a way to work around it. But stick with that plan and follow it. And if you need to make minor adjustments, make minor adjustments along the way. But if you throw out the plan altogether, it's like you didn't do any of the planning at all, and you just create chaos. And I saw that time and again on my experience in working. And so you don't want to give that up, right? And when it goes into execution too, it's the other piece, which I didn't mention, which is the people who are actually going to do the work have to be the ones who are creating the plan. You can't create the plan for them. right? And this is the biggest challenge in my coaching with superintendents who are new to this process, is telling them to hang back and just watch the conversation happen between the foreman and sometimes the crewman in helping create the plan. Because if they didn't help create the plan, they're not going to understand it. They're not going to be able to execute it the way you intended to plan it. Not only that, but they have more, when you add up all their experience, it's going to equal way more than any one individual on the team. And so they're going to have better ideas, know what's safer, know what's faster, know what's easier to do, and rely on that experience in order to make things happen. And so I'll get the conversation started, have the superintendent learn how to coach and get the conversation started, whether it's a weekly work plan or it's a pull plan or whatever it is. And then I'll pull them back and say, just stand back and watch. And they watch the conversation happen. And I said, what were all the things you were worried about? Let's see if they hit them all. And sure enough, they do. And it's like, see, they know their trade. They know what they're doing. You just got to let them do it. And in fact,
uncomfortable though,
it really can. It feels like you're giving up control, but you're not. Is there any point where if one of those 5 things didn't get covered, you couldn't say, hey, have we thought about this? What would happen if this happened? And then they'll dive right back in again. So you're not really giving up anything. You're only gaining from their knowledge and experience and engagement. Because, right, that's the other piece. What makes your job fun is feeling like you're a part of doing something. I run the PDCA game, plan, do, check, act, the ball game, where people throw the balls to each other and in a specific pattern. And they go through several continuous improvement cycles as they go. And they recognize that when they first do it, they're just focused on the task. And it gets kind of boring because they haven't thought about improving. But then once they're thinking about what they could do to make it better, while they're doing it, they're thinking about what they could do better. They're way more mentally engaged and having fun in the act because they're doing more than just doing the work, right? They're improving as they do the work. And that's what makes, right? That's not that they have to, but that's what makes it more engaging and more fun for all of us. I mean, that's what life is about. It should be fun. Think about how much time we spend in our work. It's gotta be fun.
Yeah, I love how you keep centering back on the people side of things. And you are a huge giver to the industry. A lot of your time, energy, efforts, again, designing curriculum for major courses at the Lean Construction Institute, you constantly volunteer. You're putting in time, effort, energy that's really just a labor of love, I guess. What makes you such a giver? Why do you give so much?
Well, one, I think, like I already said, it's partly in my nature, right? That whole thing, like, it's one of my triggers, actually. I actually viscerally get angry when I see somebody being treated disrespectfully. I can't take it. And I actually have to bring myself down before I engage.
Smart.
Right? Yeah, it's difficult. So partly it's in my blood, but also because of what we do to this industry, right, which I grew up with and I love, I just watch all the people in it suffering. And so that's why I feel like I'm here for it. I can do to give and reach as many people as I can to help them help themselves make their lives better in this industry is really what I want to be doing. But I'm going to hit upon another piece of this to make it more personal, which are really 2 big lessons for me and triggers that I learned along the way. And I'm going to get personal as it relates to my son. He has some challenges, and in those challenges, I've had to learn, right, that continuous improvement thing. I always focus on the gap, right? And imagine that as a kid, never celebrating what they did well, but always, well, what could you still do better? And with his particular challenges, that is, all the issues that we have with mental illness and all the rest of that, right? It drives him up the wall. And even though it's my natural tendency, it doesn't work for him at all. And so the first thing I learned is I have to celebrate the little wins, right? I have to celebrate each little step that we make along that degree. And the reason I didn't realize why that's so important is because I had never been faced with a challenge that was so to my core that I had to change something about how I interfaced and interacted that was so part of my core that it was really challenging, and it still is. That whole thing of actually recognizing when he's making even the smallest step and celebrating that small step and not focusing on the gap is really a hard change for me. And what it made me realize is all the people that I talked to, right? We talked about helping find their joy, helping find their other pieces, but a lot of these behaviors and habits are so part of their personality and who they are. Shifting that is monumentally difficult. And with the progress principle, right, which Howell has talked to us about, Hal Maycumber, I have to drop that name in there too, emphasizes is if we don't celebrate those little wins for those things that are so hard for us individually to change, we can't sustain the motivation. We will backslip every single time. And so, yeah, what's given me a renewed passion for wanting to give and help people is my own experience of realizing that change isn't easy. I thought for the longest time it was, but going through this personal experience, I realized how hard change is that I'm asking of others to engage in to help themselves. And that's helped me to see the need to celebrate their even smallest successes and steps in the right direction and help motivate them to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I almost asked this question earlier, but I didn't, and I'm going to drop it now. What you said, it change is hard, right? Very difficult. What does change people? Not that people need changed, but there are a lot of people in our industry who are suffering.
Yes.
They may know it, they may not know it. It might just be think that's how life is. What helps people change?
I think one, there are lots of things, right? We could go on a whole long list, but one, don't do it by yourself. Engage somebody else who you have a strong relationship with, who can help you and support you in that change. And that's the role that I love playing when I get the opportunity, because that's huge, right? You need that somebody who can recognize when you've made a step, somebody who can tell you it's okay when you backslip, and say you're still in the good fight and keep you going as you make
Support
that shift.
system. Yeah.
Yep, that support system is huge. And somebody also who will call you out when you've slipped and force you to look at it, right?
Radical candor. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, I can't emphasize that enough, right? Is just be frank and upfront, right? When somebody doesn't do something the way that they needed to do it, just tell them outright and say, hey, I'm sure there are reasons why you were triggered or whatever it was that led this to, but it's not acceptable. And what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it?
Amen.
And I'm here to support you.
In my mind, that's that little J philosophy. That's what I took out of Howell's class. I swear that he taught me that little J, but he claims he didn't, but he's getting credit anyway because it came from the progress principles. And again, just that little win every day, that 1% better, that 1% better is a great way to initiate overall change in an entire person or team or organization or industry for that matter. So I love what you're doing. I'm a huge fan. Where else do we want to take this?
I want to come back to that radical candor piece that you were mentioning, and I think that's key, and that's really important, to not be afraid to go wherever the conversation leads, to not be afraid to go down the emotional route, to not be afraid to go down, whatever route it might take you, wherever the conversation might lead, and ask the tough questions. Going back to your question about how do people change? If you're not challenged by somebody, if somebody doesn't poke and challenge you to get out of your comfort zone, to really investigate your thinking, you're also not gonna make that change. And lots of us can be self-motivated in that respect, but not completely. That's the other piece, I think. Where else could we take this?
We could take this in a million different
We could take
directions.
this in a million different directions. I got one more story, and then you can fit this in wherever you want to. Speaking of focusing on the individual, there was one superintendent we were working with, and he clearly didn't want us there, right? And I went for the what would bring you joy, all the rest of those pieces. And when you ask the reliable, promising questions, one of the questions is, are you having an unspoken conversation in your head where you're basically saying, I'm going to tell you whatever you want to hear to get you out of here, or something to that effect? And I was talking to him, and we were talking about different things he could do, and I just saw him looking up and away, and that was my tell that he was listening to the voice in his head. And I said, what was just the voice in your head? And he's like, all this just sounds like more work. And I didn't ask for you to come here, and and I'm already overworked. I don't need to do anything else. And I said, thank you for sharing that. Honestly, I don't want you to do extra work either. I want you to trade something up if it'll make your work easier. That's my goal. And if it's not going to do that, don't, right? But what's the easiest thing you could just change up, one little thing where it's not extra work for you, and see if that makes things a little bit better. And he agreed to that, and we built a relationship. We got to chatting, and he executed some stuff, but he was never really fully bought in. And we got into a conversation, and it was like, what really inspires you? And he's like, I really like growing things. And I was like, really? I noticed there are pots outside the trailer with tomatoes and beans and a bunch of other things in the middle of this job site. He's got buckets growing, and he's like, yeah, those are mine. And he's like, what I really love to do is be a farmer. I don't really like construction.
Wow.
And I was like, so why don't you pursue that? What would that take? And we engaged in a real conversation and putting a plan of action together about, he was near enough to retirement. It's like from construction where he could look into that. I live out in the Western Massachusetts. We're full of farmland. It's like I could put you in contact with people. The company didn't necessarily appreciate that, but it's what he needed. It's what he needed. That's part of that, following the conversation wherever it goes. And it's really about the people and their passions, not the business necessarily.
It's all about the people, baby. That's what lean builders do. Absolutely. We keep getting back there, and I think the industry is making a huge shift in that direction as well. What's, I guess, a couple pieces of advice, or however you want to mic drop this thing, the new generation coming in, where we've got an industry that's broken, yet I think starting to realize it. What is the message to those folks?
There are two things that come immediately to mind. One, challenge everything, ask questions, right? Absorb everything you can. Don't assume that what the way things are, the way things should be. That was what really worked for me as I went through the industry. But part of that was be curious. The second piece of advice is, there's a wealth of knowledge in these people who may not have the best processes, right? Who may not have the best respect for people and how they interact, but they are a wealth of knowledge, and don't discount that. You don't have to model everything that they do to learn from them. And they've got lots of good seeds of knowledge to pull and to learn. So be a sponge, absorb, be curious. And like I said, challenge everything that's in front of you. Ask why, dig in, look at what you can do, and get to know become a family, right? And a team with the people around you. That's how you're going to develop those long-lasting relationships that will carry you forward through this industry. That support.
I love it. That's what lean builders do, man. I love it, Colin. Thank you so much. Definitely, you win the contest for best facial hair so far.
Thank you. All right.
Hook you up with some type of a prize, because that is just beautiful. I look forward to seeing the Colonel Sanders wedding picture. I'm sure that's a blast. And as always, man, I got nothing but love for you, and so happy to have you here.
Absolutely. Another time we could talk all those geeked out, production law things if you want.
That's got to be another podcast.
Exactly.
Lean builders only, maybe.
All right.
Thank you, Colin.
Thanks, Adam.